Dean's question about using DDP-like curves. Again, there's a representation histogram in the background, the curves dialog. You got a nice boost there in the mid-range. You're kind of holding down the values of the background sky here, right? Shadows, mid-range highlights, and then that flat to finish. Not too extreme, kind of rounded. I kind of like Tony Hallis's idea. He calls his insurance policy the no-fly zone. You can actually lower that white point anchor a little bit below 255, so you know you're not going past with white of, say, 250. It's kind of cool. So that's a good curve for the global curves, for the initial curves. The beauty of curves is as we go further, we can then do localized, specialized types of curves to really get our contrast going. And so in the end, unlike the beginning, if we didn't do things real right, if we were too aggressive in our stretches, really pulling that sucker apart on any individual iteration, if we weren't protecting the highlights with a flat to finish kind of curve, we'll wind up with something like that histogram. And again, that's where this map, this graph, is so powerful because it's telling us what our more experienced eye will know. Oh, my background sky looks very unnaturally overly dark. My dimmest detail kind of rises very unnaturally and shockingly from the dark background sky. Oh, my core detail is completely blown out. And so this is really important because these are the very first iterations of stuff that we do. Notice that now we have no little toe on the left shadow side. We're butt up against the left-hand side. That's what we call clipping. We have actually literally thrown that detail in the garbage, never to be seen again unless we start from our master again. On the right side, and probably even worse, and I don't know if you can see where I've got that red highlight, the highlights have turned the corner, if you will, and are climbing up the side of the graph. So we bracketed so severely that we've lost that detail, we've lost this detail, and these little funny spikes are called combing, and that again is indicative of too aggressive of a stretch where we're kind of taking very important levels of gray out of the histogram, out of the image, and again throwing it in the garbage. So bad choices. This is a little bit of an exaggeration, but remember I said shadows highlights is a dangerous medicine. This is kind of the look that I see from shadow highlights being used exclusively, and I've seen APOD the kind of this, and it's not a look that I like. I think good choices, and of course this doesn't look quite as nice as it does on monitor here, but much lighter, has a gaseous, ethereal, translucent feel to it, and I think good choices with curves is going to get you more of that kind of result. So any specific questions there on stretching that we could do real quick? Otherwise, we can just keep on going. So sharpening. Sharpening I kind of think of as a two-level kind of a thing. Quote Monty Python, with a path running through the middle. Anyway, there's pre-processing level of sharpening. That's more about reconstruction. That's more about recapturing, as we talked about, some of that natural blurring that goes on in these long exposures. And so deconvolution would be a tool that we'd find in, again, many of these pre-processing packages. Maximum entropy is very common. Richardson-Lucy is a pretty common form of a deconvolution algorithm. And positive constraint, I've not used myself with CCD stack, but I hear really good things about it. And again, it is dangerous medicine. It is largely, again, a global change. As we try to sharpen our good detail, our galactic detail, tends to kind of be a little bit harsh and over-sharpened stars. And certainly, if you don't have tons of signal, it's really going to sharpen that icky background noise. And that's not something we want. PixInsight gives us the ability to mask the background and the stars to some degree, and that's great. Photoshop allows you to introduce deconvolved, very sharp images along with non-deconvolved, so you can get a custom mix without having to use a purely deconvolved, let's say, luminance master that's just too sharp in certain areas. We talked about DDP before. In addition to that curve, when Okano came up with DDP, he described it as a gamma curve with edge emphasis highlights. So there is a sharpening component to DDP.
Let me ask you a question on the DDP. Do you do it to a stacked set, or do you do it to individual?
Yeah, I would certainly do it to a stacked master file. Yep.
It takes very long to run those processes. Especially if you're doing them, it's very long.
Right, and you want really a pristine master. You want the best assembled master you can get. Tuck away, and it will, it will be check 1, 2. It'll be non-convolved, no DDP, just purely linear. That's your master file. You don't touch that. And yeah, DDP is not something you'd want to do to individual files. But yeah, so he's got DDP in addition to that gamma curve. So a lot of people say, well, turn the sharpening off. Well, it's not DDP if you turn the high-pass sharpening off. But then some people say, well, for chrominance only, for red, green, blue, yeah, use a DDP curve, but don't use the sharpening. And that's totally down with that. Wavelets is amazing. Wavelets you'll find in Images Plus. Maxim is okay. PixInsights is very, very good. And Wavelets kind of breaks our images up into different size scales, stars, the small stuff, galaxy arms, the bigger stuff. And you can really kind of dial in that sharpening to areas you want it to affect without messing up background sky too much. So that's kind of the first level of sharpening. That's more the restorative kind of sharpening. I played around in PixInsight a little bit. A couple of my friends, including my observatory partner Dave, is kind of a PixInsight guru. Dave Raffel's written some plugins for him, actually an acquisition module for them as well. And of all the things I saw there, the HDRWT, the high dynamic wavelet I thought was really, really powerful. And again, I wouldn't use it at 100%, but I think, again, in mixing with Photoshop, with layers, very powerful. The galaxy real close. It's kind of a slow transform. Very effective at really getting those dust lanes and detail very simple way. And again, you'll see images with the HWT at 100%, and I don't like the look. I think it just needs to be used judiciously, but I'd heartily recommend looking into that. So then there's that second level of sharpening. And if we're a one-shot color person, DSLR, cooled CCD, you know, there's some debate whether we want to create a pseudo-luminance from the and sharpen pseudo-luminance only. The other side will say, well, you know, ultimately it's the same data, and you're not really getting much gain doing that. But either way, if you're a monochrome imager for sure, you're only going to sharpening for luminance. We've seen the demonstrations. They're pretty dramatic. Color's a beautiful thing, but the eye, the human brain, don't see any detail in the color to speak of really. We see it all in the grayscale. Luminance, that's the money shot. We spend time to good luminance data, to sharpen it, to enhance contrast. And typically, if it is monochrome, it's going to be one by one binning, and the color is going to be 2 by 2, and going to be pretty poor quality. So I never see sharpening color as a good thing. And beyond that, now past the restorative kind of sharpening that we talked about with deconvolution, now we're enhancing detail, right? We're making things pop. And that we're using the generic term of edge filters. And that's actually not sharpening. It's simulating sharpening, right? Because when we contrast a black object against a white background, that gives the illusion of sharpness. And so usual suspects would be the high pass filter, the unsharp mask filter, the smart sharpen filter in Photoshop, and something I'm really excited about, which is actually a forensic science package plugin for Photoshop called Focus Magic. It's not expensive. It's advanced deconvolution, but it's a plugin for Photoshop. And that's a little bit weird because by definition, decon is supposed to be done on you do DDP before you touch it at all. And if you're a scientist, astronomer, certainly, yes, you're going to deconvolve before you do anything to it. And depending on what kind of research you're doing, you're probably not going to do nonlinear changes anyway. But it's kind of that you're doing advanced decon at almost a finished stage after your changes, but it's pretty dynamite, and I hardly recommend that too. The high-pass filter, really like that. This really gets into, for the first time, that layers kind of concept for Photoshop. How am I doing on time? I don't have a clock. And
15 minutes.
oh, really? Oh, well, we're gonna miss half of this. I'm sorry I wasn't better paced. But this kind of gets into layers where we need to actually use a layer, and we need to use a different blend mode than we normally use. Overlay or soft light, using about a pixel radius of 4 to 12 with the high-pass filter, kind of looking for those structures that we want to sharpen in the preview window there, and then dialing it into our taste. Smart Sharpen is really neat. There's a vicious rumor out there that this is deconvolution. It's not. I'm very friendly with a couple of Adobe programmers. It's no smarter than Sharp Mask, but it's very powerful in that you can apply it specifically to good mid-range detail without sharpening much in the shadows and the highlights.
Smart Sharpen was introduced in CS2. It opens in basic mode with these defaults, and its preview functions work as other dialogues. Notice how highlights and midtones are sharpened, while shadows are virtually unaffected. The amount percentage and pixel radius work the same as with unsharp masks. Clicking on Advanced brings up a shadow and highlight tab, offering even more control. Watch as I move shadow's fade amount towards 0. Background begins to sharpen. Yuck! As with other dialogues, we can save our own defaults. Mine are Advanced, Remove Gaussian Blur, More Accurately, an amount of 100%, a radius of 2 pixels, and all levels of shadows faded all the way. Here are my current settings for highlights.
So again, not smart as far as the algorithm. It's basic on sharp masking, but it's really nice and I guess smart in that you can dial in what you want to sharpen and pretty much leave alone what you don't want to sharpen. The Focus Magic plugin, there's the dialog for that, and if you look up there at the bubble, you can kind of see some really nice detail coming out of there. Again, it's pretty easy to use. It's murder on stars, but if you know how to mask and apply sharpening to galaxies and nebula and leave your stars alone, it's absolutely terrific. So I'm not going to go with any questions there. So we talked about setup. This is that layering in Photoshop we talked about. If we were monochrome imaging, we'd have a layer of chrominance, RGB color on the bottom there. You can see kind of low resolution and detail. And there's a luminance layer on top of there and a third layer up there. So the luminance layer's turned on now, and we're seeing some higher resolution detail there. Notice it's at the luminosity blend mode. That lets the color of the RGB show through the grayscale of the luminance, but adds all the contrast, sharpness, etc. in detail to that luminance layer. And notice I've got, again, that other layer on top there. Well, guess what? That's that high dynamic range wavelets transform that we did in PixInsight. Notice that I've only got it contributing to 37%, so we just got a little taste of that. And that also needs to be in that luminosity blend mode to let that color show through. And I've got this wacky looking thing over there, which is actually a mask. And you probably heard some of the terrifying stories of the power of Photoshop's masks. Really easy to use though. And just as an illustration, here's all the different blend modes. We saw we used overlay and soft light for the high pass, and we've got that luminosity blend mode. That's the interplay between the layers, how we want the light to pass between layers. And again, the opacity, very powerful. How much percentage do we want to introduce? Any change that we do in Photoshop with that opacity setting. Talked about saturating color. Certainly artistic license is taken to enhance the beauty, creates visual interest and excitement, but it is science, man. It defines and delineates structures. O3 from HA, pink from teal. There's real science in there, and it's up to us to decide how much and where we want to do that. Again, saturate kind of is a blanket for all kinds of color changes that we make. We've really got to deal with gradients very early on, those horrible natural gradients, but more significantly, the light pollution gradients. And there's some great tools out there. Gradient Exterminator by Russ Croman is a plugin for Photoshop. Again, not too expensive, but man, it's amazing for getting rid of severe gradient. Pix and Sight's dynamic background extraction, also extremely powerful for getting rid of gradients, vignetting, etc. Maxim DL's got flattened background, which is okay. AstroArt 5's got a new remove gradient, which is pretty good. Then we talk about bias removal. Don't have much time to really go into that, but when we looked at those left side shadows, histograms, kind of aligning, as we'll see, those color channels, and of course the very difficult color balance, because no matter how hard we work, no matter how well we're calibrated G2V, we need to do a lot of color tweaking down the pike. How much? That's the question. Okay, we took that last year from here with a camera lens at the Winter Star Party, and so I thought that was kind of a tasteful level, at least the way it looks on monitor here. It's got a lot more.
Just as these objects should maintain their translucence and ethereal quality, there's a point where tasteful coloration jumps the shark into garishness. Where that point lies is a matter of individual taste. But if you see this rabbit and hear him sing, "Three cheers for the red, white, and blue," you've probably gone too far.
So, I have 5.5 hours of this stuff on Flash movies, and, if I didn't feel as strongly about learning this stuff visually, I heartily recommend this. I've got them with me. I give you a great deal. Tony Hallis's Easy CCD, Adam Block's tutorials. Very visual medium, really great to learn this way rather than burying your nose in a book. So the RGB histogram gets a little bit more complicated because now we're talking about 3 channels, right? Red, green, and blue. And we've got a little bit of misalignment oftentimes in the channels. Notice this yellow line on the left says bias. We kind of got to take the bias out of there and align those channels. Those black points need to match red, green, blue. And then that balance typically is seeing that pseudo white point, and the histograms look fairly homogeneous. If we're type of red emission nebula, it's going to be red bias naturally. If we're shooting a galaxy, it's going to be more green blues. But to some degree, there's validity there in having the 3 channels of an RGB histogram looking homogeneous. Color, lots of ways to do it. If you've got CS4 or 5, I highly recommend the Vibrance panel, which includes a saturation slider. Vibrance seeks to add saturation in the areas that are most dilute, that have the least color in them. And the saturation slider gives you much more control than the actual hue/saturation tool. So if you're pre-CS4, you can use hue saturation. You can use match color, which is quite powerful. You can use that color correction slider in the shadow highlights that we talked about. And I'd recommend the saturation blend mode in the layers to get a little bit less noise. Tony Hallis introduced us to a fantastic way of saturating in the lab mode using contrast curves in the color channels of A and B. And if you come talk to me, I'll tell you about this action here that's for pre-CS4, a way to do Vibrance. But if you got CS4 5, I really like the Vibrance saturation for adding color, and I really like Tony Hallis's lab idea for saturation. So smoothing, again, is that judicious elimination of noise necessitated by insufficient signal. Few of us ever get as much signal as we want, and rarely as we need. So we rely on some of these noise reduction filters. And interestingly enough, took me a long time to realize, because I would beat things to heck and then smooth as an afterthought. In the end, I've come to understand that smoothing actually facilitates sharpening. If we can get rid of the small, grainy, icky, bad, fake stuff, the larger structures then are more effectively sharpened down the road. The usual suspects for smoothing filters would be dust and scratches in the median filter, the speckle filter in Photoshop. Dust and scratches is great for, let's say, blooming if you've got an ABG camera. Median's really nice for just background sky. Artifacts, blooms, that sort of smoothing. Despeckle is great as an after effect when nothing else quite gets rid of the grainy look, the speckly look to the most dim areas. But the good news is there are much smarter filters now for dealing with noise, and I hope some people wake up to that. These are more intelligent algorithms. They look at noise, they look at background sky, areas of no detail, and analyze what is noise versus what is desirable signal, and they seek to subtract that out. So this is Photoshop's reduced noise filter. Typically a strength of 5.6, a preserved details of 50 to 60%. Is very good, but watch the reduced color noise. You'll get a lot of loss of saturation if that's too high, and you don't want to use a smoothing filter for sharpening, I don't think, so I typically don't use that. Love Neat Image. Adam Block really likes Noise Ninja. I think Neat Image by far is out there. It really is bright. It puts a box up. It says, I know this is a featureless area. If it's not, you can move that box and say, no, this is a featureless area. It analyzes that grainy noise pattern in RGB or in grayscale if it's a luminance, and it, again, seeks to absolutely subtract out that bad stuff from that good stuff. Love it, love it, love it. And again, with the power of Photoshop, you can use it selectively where you want to.
As with the other S's, smoothing can be overdone. Images become artificial looking, plastic, and mottled.
Yep, so, and I always give a free disc to anybody who can tell me what this picture has to do with smoothing. And nobody's ever gotten it, and it shocks me. But if you figure it out, let me know, and $100, 5.5 hours. What's that? What this has to do with smoothing, you get a free 5.5 hour, $100 disc. But you can come and see me later if you figure it out. So again, local versus global. The other pre-processing software, for the most part, except for PixInsight, a little bit of Maxim with its restrict pixel range controls, it can't give you the kind of control you want. There are elements to our images. There is dark background sky. There is rather bright stars, cores. There is rather dim, diffuse, beautiful that just rises off of. So we really want to address all of those things rather independently. The purists will say this is, the tool of the devil. Those of us who are seeking to make beautiful pictures, again, I'm a former musician. That's like a recording studio when you pay 100% of attention to your guitar sounds and tones, and then you get your drums, and you're really able to dial those in a way that you get the most bang for your buck from every element there. So the powers of Photoshop selection, local versus global changes. You've got tools, very powerful, a color range tool. You can select shadows, highlights. You can select the reds, the greens, the blues. The magic wand, which is pretty magical, where you can grab up background sky very easily. The lassos, which I'd call more heavy-handed, sort of manual changes where you say, I just want to select this area, draw a circle around it, feather it, and then make your change and have at it. We have the individual channels available to us, the red, the green, and the blue, that we can address separately. We can smooth a blue channel more than a red or a green channel. If we switch to that lab mode we talked briefly about, we've got access to the lightness channel only, the gamma, without touching the color. We've got those multiple layers we can create that we saw in Photoshop. The blend modes, remember, that change the interplay of light between the layers, how much contribution any change makes to a final mix with the opacity slider, masks and blend if. And we're able to modify by expanding, contracting selections, invert selections, use something very powerful called thresholding, and save and reload selections that we've made. Let's look at layer mask, probably going to be the last thing we'll get time for. But again, sounds real scary. I think this really expresses it very simply. And again, this is very indicative of my teaching style, and love to do one-on-one with you. Love to get you some of the tutorials. What the layer mask itself looks like.
What if we wanted a change to affect a minority of an image? A black conceal all mask would be more efficient. Watch as I hold down the Alt key and click on the mask icon again. We get a black conceal all mask. The entire change is to enhance in our subject only, and its best signal at that. Since black concealed, I need some white paint to alter this mask. Switching the foreground color to white, I choose the paintbrush tool at a reduced hardness. That will result in a feathered effect for smooth transitions. I size my brush with the bracket keys, making sure the mask and not the image is active. I reveal the saturation where I want it. There, only the galaxy center is enhanced.
So pretty awesome tools is Photoshop's masks. Sharing, finally, web and print. Talked a little bit about that. Probably don't have the time for that. But these are the basic settings you want to do in Photoshop when you first get in there that the basic series can help you with, get set up. This is the disk. Again, love to talk to you about that. OPT carries it. IP for AP. There's a new thing in production, soup to nuts, where I cover pre-processing, post-processing, the whole thing. And again, other resources like this, talks maybe like this, probably better ones. Winter Star Party, Texas Star Party, Okie Tex. The imaging, man, these are invaluable, really good presentations. You can really just hyper leap by attending these things. Astrophotoinsight.com is a great resource for imagers. Jerry Rodriguez, of course, Astropix has always been. Florida's own Scott Ireland's got a great book called Photoshop Astronomy. DVDs and Learning at the Sky Center there at University of Arizona. Mentioned Tony's discs. Starazona's got a bunch of free tutorials up on their website. Neil Fleming and myself do one-on-one training via GoToMeeting over the web. You can get together with your data. Ron Wadowski's got 2 great books out that are pretty invaluable. And Alan, who is a Photoshop programmer, and myself are writing a book for Springer Press that we got to deliver by July 2013. I guess it's all been said before, but again, I think through these alliterative S's, we're going to keep it very basic, very easy to remember, and kind of just recommend, hey, we think this is the best method for doing this. There's our rig up at New Mexico Skies, finally. Long battle to get out there and work and everything, but that spaghetti is working really, really well. And it's an M51 we finished the other night, and a Galaxy cluster we did a couple weeks ago, NGC 697 group. And again, be with Attic for another month. Love to talk to you about CCD cameras over at the booth there in the vendor area. Support your vendors. And that's it. Thanks.